pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 554140 relating to Nigeria and the sanctions regime. I'd like to thank the 220,330 people who have signed this petition, or at least had done when I last checked it this morning, especially the 853 of them who are my constituents in Chipping Barnet. This petition has been prompted by the disturbing events in Nigeria over recent weeks. There have been widespread protests regarding the activities of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad of the Nigerian police, known as SARS. This unit has a deeply controversial reputation, and the hashtag #EndSARS started to appear prominently on social media back in 2017. Reports of violence and human rights abuses by SARS date back several years, but these latest protests followed circulation of a video in early October, shockingly, which many believe shows a man being killed by SARS officers. On the 11th of October, President Buhari announced plans to disband the unit. However, such promises have been made in the past, and yet SARS seemingly has continued to operate. This would in fact be the fourth time it was abolished. Many protesters therefore felt that disbanding SARS, even assuming it happens, would not be sufficient to tackle long-standing problems with police brutality, particularly if SARS officers are simply assigned to different parts of the police service. Activists are now calling for a complete overhaul of policing in Nigeria. They also want police officers responsible for beatings, killings, extortion, unlawful detention and other crimes to be held to account. So the protests continued, and thousands of Nigerians, most of them under 30, took part in events such as peaceful marches, candlelit vigils, multi-faith prayer sessions. People came together across divides, having different social, cultural and tribal backgrounds. Supportive comments flowed in from the Nigerian diaspora around the world, from celebrities, and the End SARS movement quickly widened beyond the concerns expressed initially about policing and started to capture some of the general frustrations of a young population demanding an end to poor governance and corruption. But I'm afraid the situation became far more grave on 20th October, when the Nigerian army and police opened fire on a peaceful demonstration at the Lekki toll gate in suburban Lagos. What happened is disputed, but Amnesty International have tracked events through photos and video footage posted by protesters. They show army trucks approaching the protesters from both sides of the toll gate, blocking them in. Shooting with live rounds started almost immediately with no warning given. A local musician, Obianuju Catherine Ude, was streaming the events live on Instagram as it happened, and later she said, there was a guy that was running and he fell and we looked at him. He was shot in the back. Several people are now looking for missing loved ones, including Elisha Sunday Ibanga. An eyewitness told CNN that Elisha's brother Victor was shot in the head during the protest and his body was taken away. The US broadcaster report that they have seen a geolocated photo of Victor Ibanga lying in a pool of blood and wrapped in the white and green Nigerian flag, one of the same flags held by protesters earlier in the evening as they sang their national anthem. Similarly and equally tragically, Peace Okon is someone who hasn't seen her younger brother Wisdom since he went to the demonstration on the night of the shootings. She said, I've gone to hospitals, I've gone to police stations, I've gone everywhere, I can't find him. It isn't clear how many were injured or lost their lives in Lekki, but Amnesty International estimate that 56 people have died since the protests began. And they've documented many instances where excessive and disproportionate force has been used to try to control or stop protests. The shootings at the Lekki toll gate have sent shock through many in Nigeria. For many, it seemed like the last straw. The government there has promised judicial panels of inquiry to investigate what happened, but there is widespread scepticism about whether these processes will be effective in holding to account those responsible for the bloodshed and the human rights abuses which have occurred. And that concern is, I believe, felt by many constituents here in the UK, especially those with heritage or family links to Nigeria. This is illustrated by the huge support for this e-petition we're considering this evening, which asks the UK government to consider imposing sanctions. Now, as I read it, the petitioners are asking for Magnitsky-type sanctions against named individuals within the Nigerian government and security forces. There's a recognition that generalised old-style sanctions applied to the country as a whole might cause hardship to ordinary people not in any way responsible for the problems highlighted by the petition. So this debate is a vital opportunity to hear from the Minister and to have her respond to this urgent appeal from the e-petitioners. An appeal that the government consider imposing targeted sanctions against certain individuals believed to be culpable in relation to the violent and excessive police response to peaceful protests in Nigeria. The new Magnitsky sanctions regime started to operate in July, and I believe its creation is one of the best and most important foreign policy decisions made since the Conservatives returned to government in 2010. It puts us ahead of many other countries in showing how seriously we take human rights abuses around the world. It even, I gather, earned us praise from Guy Verhofstadt, which is undoubtedly a rare thing. But I believe that the petitioners have a credible case for the imposition of individualised sanctions such as travel bans and asset freezes. Now, of course, I appreciate there are real sensitivities about anything which might be considered interference in the domestic affairs of another country, especially where there was a previous colonial involvement. But I still hope that ministers should give serious consideration to what the e-petitioners request. And my second ask of ministers is that they provide reassurance about UK aid and security programmes which involve Nigerian police, military and security forces. In their responses to written questions on this matter, the government has emphasised these programmes are intended to improve transparency and accountability, as well as strengthen respect for human rights, the rule of law and protection of minorities. But I know my constituents signing this petition want more clarity and certainty about what these UK programmes have achieved and how they're assessed. I believe they'll be reassured if we have a clear statement that no UK taxpayers' money can be misused by security forces in Nigeria or in any circumstances deployed on activities which suppress peaceful protests. My third question for ministers is what representations they have or are prepared to make to the Nigerian government about human rights abuses against Christians. Charities such as Christian Solidarity Worldwide and Open Doors have documented a worrying increase in attacks on Christian communities in Nigeria by terrorist groups over recent years, and their plight must never be forgotten. Fourthly and finally, I would ask ministers to step up engagement with the Nigerian diaspora in the United Kingdom. There are many British Nigerians who want to deploy their knowledge and their understanding of the country to help shape the UK's response to unfolding events in Nigeria. Worried about the situation and distressed about the Lekki tollgate tragedy and other loss of life, they're brimming with enthusiasm to help, to make a difference and to be involved in building a better future for Nigeria. In this regard, I particularly want to thank my constituent Lara Ayodeji Akindeji for contacting me to share her concerns and offer her help. Her support and briefing for this debate has been invaluable. So my final request would be to ask the Minister to meet me and a group of constituents to discuss these matters further. Mr. Gray, Nigeria is a country with so much going for it. A young and hugely talented population, massive natural resources and a rapidly developing economy. If the End SARS protesters secured the reform and the improved governance they're demanding, Nigeria could become a formidable economic powerhouse. And the diaspora community here can be a vital bridge linking our two countries in a brighter future of increased trade and prosperity in the years to come. Thank you.
The question is, has considered e-petition 554150 related to Nigeria and the sanctions regime. Kate Osama.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the honourable member for Chipping and Barnett for her passionate opening for this debate. I would also like to thank Silas Oja for creating this petition, which now has more than 220,000 signatures, including almost 2,000 of my own constituents in Edmonton who signed the petition we are debating today. And I'm sure that I'm not the only member to have been inundated with messages from constituents in recent months, urging them to do whatever they can to lend their voice to the End SARS protests. As the chair of the All-Party Group for Nigeria, I was particularly keen to speak on this debate and highlight the need for the UK to stand with the Nigerian people against an increasingly cruel and brutal regime. The situation in Nigeria is incredibly serious, with tragedy after tragedy unfolding on the streets in state after state, as the Nigerian government and its security forces take ever more repressive measures to end a protest movement, which has given hope to millions across the globe. The End SARS movement is not just about disbanding the special anti-robbery squads. It is a movement led by the youth of Nigeria who took to the streets of Nigeria peacefully, demanding an end to brutality, extortion and extrajudicial executions, and for a truly democratic Nigeria. The bravery of the youth-led movement will never be defeated. Today, we need to consider how the government should respond to both the movement itself and the violent actions of the Nigerian regime. However, we must also take this opportunity to look beyond sanctions to a way in which development funding is spent in Nigeria. Instead of funding corrupt security services and investing in projects which do not benefit ordinary Nigerians, we need a new focus on poverty relief and anti-corruption programmes. Mr. Gray, it is vital that we recognise the role of the UK and how these events have unfolded in Nigeria. Despite previously stating the opposite, the government has now admitted to funding SARS units for the last 4 years. That funding not only included the provision of training to those units, but the supply of equipment. At the very moment in which Amnesty International had declared SARS units to have been involved in extrajudicial killings, corruption and torture, the government was using the aid budget to train and equip those units. In fact, between 2016 up to this year, more than 10 million went towards programmes from which SARS units benefited. That is not only immoral, it makes it harder for UK to play a positive role in Nigeria during this vital period. How can the government, with a straight face, call for an end to violence against protesters, having helped train and equip the security forces who are carrying out that violence? So today, I hope the Minister will publicly apologise for the decision to fund SARS units and pledge a full and independent inquiry into this matter. Mr. Gray, the 20th of October 2020 will be remembered as the Lekki Tollgate massacre, the day a deliberate and coldly calculated attack on peaceful Nigerian civilians was carried out by the Nigerian army. The Nigerian government has since taken part in an attempted cover-up of this massacre. Security forces in Nigeria make muted responses to the murder of protesters. While governments across the world have called on the Nigerian government and the security forces to stop killing protesters, the UK government has hedged its bets, issuing only weak and timid statements. It is therefore a gift to the Nigerian government when our government fails to explicitly condemn the Nigerian regime for killing its own citizens. So will the Minister today finally condemn the Nigerian regime for its part in the Tollgate massacre and the continued killing of peaceful protesters in Nigeria? Mr. Gray, the Nigerian government says that it has disbanded SARS. but the corruption and brutality of the security forces continues. The Nigerian government's violence against its own citizens appears only to be intensifying. The Nigerian government needs to stop freezing bank accounts of key protesters. It needs to stop illegal detentions of key protesters. The Minister of Information for the federal government went on record to state the CNN reporting of the massacre is, and I quote, fake news. This is undemocratic conduct, and it really needs to be called out. So I ask that the Minister uses this opportunity to end the UK government's neutrality on this issue. The UK must never be neutral when it comes to human rights abuses. Are the rights and needs and dreams of young Nigerian people not the same as those that are here in the UK? The UK should not be a safe haven for anyone who denies their own citizens the same freedoms they come to enjoy in the UK. Mr. Gray, all too often, when a repressive regime is targeted with economic sanctions, it is the civilians who pay the price, while the regime itself becomes more entrenched and less open to change. But the UK government can use the sanctions under the global human rights regime, which targets individuals involved in human rights violations and abuses. So, if the UK's position is a global force of good, then I ask the UK government to add the names of the Nigerian government and the security services to the designated list of those responsible for the worst human rights abuses. As I come to a close, it is time for the UK to change course and stand in solidarity with those fighting for a new Nigeria. Let's stand together. Let's get rid of corruption, extortion, extrajudicial murders and massacres, because it's time for a new Nigeria. And I thank you.
Don't do that.
Thank you, Mr. Gray, for calling me to speak. And I must say it's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady for Edmonton, who speaks quite rightly with great passion about one of the great countries in this world that is sadly being racked by violence, and violence against young people. Now, I would argue that the greatest book in the English language, and I know there may be some debate about this, but the greatest book in the English language is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, the great Nigerian writer. And the beauty of that book is the way it explains the challenge of changing generations to live together, and the way it speaks about values falling away and community being eroded by outside pressure. What we're seeing in Nigeria today is part of that story. It's a tragedy that we are watching. It's a tragedy that we are all witnessing, because as we see things falling apart, the pressure this time is not foreign colonialism, forgive me. The pressure instead is corruption and violence and attempts at control. And that's why I totally agree with my honourable friend, the member for Edmonton. We need to call out the corruption. We need to use the powers that we have in this country to stop those who are profiting from the wealth of that great nation and hiding it here. Now, some people will remember when General GOWON left Nigeria with half the central bank, so it is said, and moved to London. We know that today, even now, in this great city of ours, there are, sadly, some people who have taken from the Nigerian people and hidden their ill-gotten gains here. We know that our banks, sadly, have been used for that profit and for that illegal transfer of assets. And that means that the UK is in an almost unique position in being able to actually do something to really exert pressure on those who have robbed the Nigerian people. Now, this puts a particular onus on the Minister, and I know my right honourable friend knows it, that using Magnitsky sanctions today isn't just about protecting Nigeria, although it is. It's not just about respecting Nigerian young people who have been robbed and murdered by these SARS units. It's actually about protecting the United Kingdom, because what happens in Nigeria matters fundamentally to us here. This is the third country of the Commonwealth. This is a country of 200 million people. It is going to be the great economic powerhouse of Africa and one of the great economic powerhouses of the world. This is a country whose wealth, not just in the oil off the river state, but in the imagination and creativity of its people, is witnessed every day in Nollywood, and perhaps more my style, at the great University of Jos. This is a country that gives so much to the world already, despite the fact that it is ill-governed, brutalised and robbed. Just imagine what it could give if the Plateau State wasn't a scene of conflict and anti-SARS movements, but instead was the global centre of learning that it really, truly could be, and indeed was up until the 1960s. So look, this is an opportunity for the UK to do something real, not just in the interest of Nigerians, though it would be, not just in the interest of Africans, though it would be that too, but fundamentally in the interests of the British people. This is a moment when these petitioners have got it absolutely right. They are not just arguing for the rights of young Nigerians who are claiming their own rights. They are arguing for the rights of Democrats, of free people, and of honourable people everywhere. And I hope that my right honourable friend and her colleague, the Secretary of State, will listen, will look at the sanctions regime and choose very carefully where they apply.